is a powerful venue through which we get to understand ourselves. It is when we are being most fully human.
Dallas is curious right now, and you can see that through dance, you can see that through music, you can see that through the visual arts, you can see that through theater.
It's a pleasure.
There was a lot of trepidation about being in public and moving our bodies with a movement disorder, or Parkinson's disease specifically. People came to the DMA and they were so invested into the art and what the art was awakening in their bodies and minds and emotions has really built self-confidence and allowed people to feel a greater sense of freedom when they tap into the creative side of their brains.
Last year, TI and the TI Foundation gave a combined $3.5 million to organizations here in Dallas. We did that because we know that the arts is a key component of building a strong community.
Arts are important to our citizens and to our city as a whole. That's why over the last 20 years we have completed the largest arts district in the United States.
This city is truly becoming international, and part of the reason is the contribution of the arts.
Art is a pathway through which kids can build the skills in order to learn how to be resilient and channel their resilience.
The arts are far more than just entertainment. They are a representation of culture. They are an opportunity for people to get together. It's a sharing of ideas.
Back home in Dallas tonight, our entire city is celebrating.
Winning the Tony Award was one of the most thrilling, most inspiring, terrifying experiences, and accepting an award on behalf of the entire city of Dallas. 60 years of artists and citizens and donors and civic leaders and audiences who together had contributed to bringing Dallas Theater Center to this moment in time.
There's an ability to start something here, and not just start, but be able to maintain it. And the city of Dallas is able to produce that.
Our goals are not just to be a city in Texas. Our goals are to be one of the most outstanding cities in our nation and to make the arts accessible for the residents of Dallas and all of our visitors.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Mike Rawlings.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm leaving as mayor in 2 months and 8 days. And this is my last Arts Month, and I'm so excited that we're doing this. Welcome to the Creative Conversation. We are doing this, first of all, because I'm mayor and I can do this, okay? It's a little bit of a perk. I get that, and I get a free parking space any place in the city until I'm not mayor, so I have to give that up. These are the two perks. But second, as we thought about what was happening in Dallas, I realized that we didn't talk about art enough. And I felt that at least once a year, we should get together and discuss the issues about our city and how to be a more creative and exciting city for the arts. So for that tenure, we have had discussions on music, on theater, on education, on what we can do better as a city. And tonight's conversation, I think, will be informative for me And I always go to something where I struggle with and think about and discuss because it's something that we can learn about. I'll introduce the subjects in a moment, but I want to say thank you for all being here. I think our city manager is here, T.C. Broadnex. T.C., thank you for coming. And for any of the city council people that are here, thank you for showing up as well. So tonight, what I'm really excited about is we've got three very engaged, intelligent individuals that care about the city a lot and care about this subject. We've met a couple of times, once in a bar, and we just sat and talked. And I realized this was something that I wanted to spend more time talking to these individuals about. But let me introduce each of them to you. First is Mark Lamster. He's the award-winning architectural critic of the Dallas Morning News, a professor in the architectural school at the University of Texas at Arlington, a Loeb Fellow of the Harvard Graduate School of Design. His acclaimed biography, his most recent biography, of the late architect Philip Johnson, The Man in the Glass House, is getting great reviews, and it was just published this last year. He's written a couple of other books that we'll be talking about. He's a native of New York City and decided to come to the 214 area code and now lives in with his family in Dallas. Thank you, Mark, for showing up to here and the city of Dallas. Mark Lamster. Second is a very important conceptual artist that lives here in Dallas, whose hybrid media projects engage history as a lens to view socio-political issues of the present. You'll hear about one of her better-known works, Drinking Fountain No. 1, discussing American civil rights movement. She has been chosen to serve as the Dallas discussion leader for the Reading Monuments, a coalition of reading groups in southern U.S. cities that deal with this issue of Confederate monuments. She holds a BA in radio, television, and film, and also in Spanish and sociology from the University of Texas. She holds a Master's of Fine Arts from San Francisco Art Institute. Her work has been exhibited throughout the United States and as well as internationally, and she's been working at SMU for many years. We're so happy to have her. Lauren Woods. Lauren? She's also the coolest dresser I know. And then lastly, a graduate of Irving Nimitz High School. She went off to New York and has come back to Dallas. She's the founder of Cry Havoc Theater and the recipient of the 2018 National Community Impact Award from Theater for Young Audiences USA. Maura's Dallas directing and devising credits include Cry Havoc's Crossing the Line, which is a new show that's coming out. It's a co-production between Cry Havoc and Kitchen Dog Theater. She directed Babel, the Shots Fired, which is about gun violence, and the Outsiders Project. She has decided to come back to Dallas and make her work focus on young people and the political issues that we face. She's a perfect addition to this group. Maura Richards-Bem. Maura, thank you for being here. So tonight, we're going to talk about the intersection of art and politics. We live in a very political world. We all feel it day in and day out. And I think it's inherent that we ask ourselves a question in this, and that is the intersection of art and social change, and what does that do to each of them? It is obviously at time that major political statements come from art. The question to us tonight is, can politics help create art, especially here in Dallas? So we know that art can make good politics, a song, a comedy routine, a painting, but can politics make something that transcends the political world that we live in? This conversation is and has been relevant for a long time. Here in Dallas last year, the Nasher Prize was given to Theaster Gates, who's a very social practice artist. He makes a point that you have to get out of the studio and make sure that you are active, whether it's on gun violence, drugs, or whether it's a natural disaster. Tomorrow night, Saluna is bringing Grammy Award winner Terrence Blanchard, Renee Harris, and Dallas-based visual artist Andrew F. Scott on a show that is inspired and explores racial healing in America. And last week, DMA recently held a panel, Maura, that you were on, and Jonathan Norton and Sam Brookham were talking about politics and performance art. So this is a hot topic, and I thought we'd spend some time by having these conversations. We hope that our creative city exploration and sojourn will be deeper and more important to us. So let's start, and we'll start with Mark, since he's written the most books. One of them is The Secret Diplomatic Career of the Painter Peter Paul Rubens, Master of Shadows, that I read because I like Rubens, and I learned a lot about what was happening. As an art lover, a historian, you look through time, you look how society and social change has interacted with art making and that experience. What's there to learn about that sitting here today?
Well, that's a very good, broad question. First, let me just thank you for inviting me to this, but more importantly, having this at all. It's really refreshing to see a city where the mayor cares so much about the arts, and I hope our next mayor will as well. And thank you. Thank you for, mainly thank you all for coming out here. So, you know, there's a sense, I think, that people have that art and politics should never mix, that they're completely separate, that art is pleasure and politics is this awful, evil thing operated on by sorry. That's not my fault. And that art is something pure and separate. But the truth, I think, is completely different. So I've written these 3 books, and I've written one book on Rubens, a painter from the 17th century Europe. I've written a book about 19th century baseball in America, and I've written about a book now, and I really do hope you'll go and buy it, about Philip Johnson, a 20th century American architect. And people ask me, what the heck do these things have to do with each other? And the answer is, well, kind of nothing. But also kind of, there is a through line. And I think you'll see it if I tell you a little bit about each of the books. So this is an image from that you'll see in my book about Rubens. Rubens was a diplomat as well as a painter. And a lot of his paintings describe the political situation in Europe at the time he was painting. And this painting is called The Horrors of War, one of the most influential paintings in Western art history. And actually, you can see those figures screaming, or a woman with her arms up like a touchdown, I guess because it's Texas. And you know, she's actually a symbol of Europe, and she's just terrified that this is war ravaging the continent of Europe, and this is the sort of the horrors of war, and this was sort of Rubens' protest against that political situation in the middle of a 100 Years' War.
Kind of a Guernica sort of thing.
Well, Guernica directly comes inspired by this painting. And in fact, that figure, if you look at Guernica, you'll see that Picasso has actually taken some of these figures and transposed them in his own language very much to his own work. And it's a oft repeated, the themes in this painting, the figures are oft repeated. Next image I'm going to show you. There we go. Well, a little hard to see them here, but what you have here is a bunch of American baseball players, actually the best professional baseball players of the 19th century, all-stars, climbing up the Sphinx in Egypt. Now, I'm pretty sure you can't do this anymore, and I can definitely tell you you're not allowed to try and throw baseballs at its eye, which they tried to do, being good American tourists. But what they were doing, this trip was sponsored by Albert Spalding, whose name you may know from the sporting goods company that still bears his name. And the mission was really to spread not just baseball, but the entire American way around the world, as well as his sporting goods empire. So this was a bit of cultural diplomacy in the 19th century. And the final image I'm going to show you is from my latest book on Philip Johnson. And in case you're wondering whether architecture can be political or not, whether it's just this sort of, abstract object with no political meaning, I think about this. This is Johnson right here operating in Dallas, the JFK Memorial. What could be more political than this object created in Dallas to memorialize the slain president as part of an urban renewal project? It really is no more political project that you can imagine. So to me, art is always political, and politics is quite often artless. But to me, it's impossible to think about these things separately, and the idea that you can is kind of folly, and also it robs the richness of art when you do it, because I think that complexity is part of what makes it such a powerful instrument in our lives.
Thank you, Mark. Lauren, you take this conversation, enter this conversation from a different perspective. You're a working artist. What's the role of the working artist, you, in this conversation, and how has it helped you wrestle through it?
Well, and I'm going to just read a couple of prepared notes because I like lists, so so I can get through it. So, okay, so before I answer your question, Mayor Rawlings, I'm going to first show just two quick videos for the work that I moved back to Dallas for in 2009, which was a Dallas drinking fountain project. So it began, of course, when the 2003 rediscovery of the Jim Crow white-only traces of a sign was rediscovered in the county records building down the street.
2 years ago, Dallas County commissioners were wrapped up in a controversy over what to do with the whites-only signs that were once placed over water fountains in the records building. Well, that issue, it's come up again because an artist wants to do an historic artistic display at one of the fountains. New at 4, NBC 5's Ramona Logan is live in Dallas with the details on the story. The controversy continues.
Yes, the first one ended 2 years ago, as you said, when the county decided to put a plaque above the remnants of that white-only sign explaining the historic significance of the sign. An artist wants to take it one step further. Lauren Butterfly Woods wants to project a 45-second video on the wall over the remnants of a controversial whites-only sign over a water fountain.
Instead of the water coming on, a projection would come on somewhere around this area.
The video will include historic images of civil rights protesters being pounded by water as they fought for the right to do simple things like drinking out of a public water fountain.
People being sprayed and, pushed to the ground with these water hoses. And it's recontextualized and digitized and kind of played with, and I kind of retell the story of that era.
Agree to put it on the agenda. I'm going to take a recess. Woods remembers the controversy 2 years ago when protesters wanted the sign covered up.
For the newer generation, something like this is a living piece of history, and in a museum it can act as a tombstone, which can create a sort of apathy and distance.
Dallas County commissioners are interested in her concept. She's willing to produce it at no cost to the county. There is one hitch. Her original concept would not allow someone to drink from the fountain until the 45-second video plays out.
If somebody is interested and wants to be able to look at the history of it, then that's fine. But to force people to wait 45 seconds to get a drink, you basically make that water fountain inoperable.
I think it's okay to wait 45 seconds for a drink of water. Some of us have waited 45 years and longer for this day.
Now, I talked with SCLC President Joyce Foreman. She and others protested the whites only sign 2 years ago. She doesn't think the artistic video is a good idea. She believes that the white only signs and the video belong in a museum. Reporting live from Mona Logan, NBC5, Dallas.
So that was 2005 when I went before the Commissioner's Court with that proposal. I was a young 25-year-old. Note to the wise, never give your DJ card to the news because they will put it in. My name's not Butterfly. That was my DJ name back in the day. But of course, you know, but the good thing was that was the only way people recognized me was because that butterfly was there. So 8 years later, and lots of lessons later of learning how to launch a major public work in the public sphere as an individual without an institution, Drinking Fountain number 1 was unveiled at the County Records Building in 2013. We're going to unveil it, but we're not exactly sure what's going to happen because Jim Crow has come to haunt this building and created some, you know, technical things. So sometimes it's work, but by Monday, it will be all within concept. It's officially a sculpture. The highlight of this project is Drinking Fountain number 1, which is a new media interventionist monument where we transform the water fountain to dialogue with the relic that is in place. We're not commemorating white only, we're not commemorating Jim Crow or that time period, but we have this opportunity. Oh, it stopped. Okay, it didn't finish. What you would see is the fountain sort of spurting out water 3 feet in the air because of the old plumbing of the building. We didn't anticipate 200 people showing up to this opening. I pulled out this slide because it's from a 2015 keynote lecture I gave at the Americans for the Arts, and I was asked to give a presentation on Dallas Drinking Fountain Project and what was the changing role of artists in the public sphere. And so of course I had to, you know, fill it with GIFs and clip art, but to say that artists do more than paint in their studio and wear berets, right? Like we do other things. And so I was going to share with you just a little bit of what we were calling for arts workers to sort of do as we consider the changing nature of public art outside of the decorative and into more process-based work. So we were calling on cultural workers to actively practice field work together, to commit as critical creative thought partners, to embrace resistance as a purpose for discovery, to hold space for the entire spectrum and choreography of a creative production process, to reconsider compensation structures, and the last and most important point that we wanted cultural workers to really consider was to really commit to public art as a political tool by supporting the political agency of artists. So when we think about art, when I think about art, if we think about it as not only an object, but as a means to an end, then we're talking about art as a process, art as a method, and it's a powerful way of contributing to our shared humanity. So the process of working in the public sphere then becomes inherently political. And I'm not only interested in representing the political, but because, you know, we know that art objects document culture, and including the shared political moments and cultural shifts and ideas. So they're naturally grounded in social endeavors and encounters. But I'm not only interested in representing politics, but I'm interested in working toward an art that functions in politics and that is activist in nature and can possibly serve as politics. So getting back to your question, some of the lessons I've learned in embracing a practice of artistic citizenship that centers on sort of socially engaged processes in art production is that there's always enough time for the right work. As you can see from this document, which is from the work from the Drinking Fountain, we began in 2003, and it's still ongoing, but the fountain unveiled in 2013, so a 10-year process. I also think about presence, so the presence of myself as an artist. I think about process, and I think about relationships as key materials rather than stone and granite and traditional materials, and how creating platforms for convergence that promote not only the contemplative, but also the dialogical. And then I also think about art as iterative, emergent, and co-creative. And I think about art as responsive. So again, thinking about holding space for the entire choreography of an artwork and process, sometimes we come into conflict. And actually, that can be a really, really rich space to work. And so lastly, I think about failure and how failure can be generative. So if art is a process, then all things that I've just listed reflects the spectrum of humanity. And failure is part of that spectrum as well. And so failure can be an opportunity for presenting something new.
I want to talk about that in a little bit. I want to introduce more into the conversation. Thank you, Lauren. You've decided to take your artistic direction by helping young people get involved in these conversations. It's a remarkable idea and a remarkable journey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I, as you said, I graduated from Nimitz High School, go Vikings, class of '93. And then I moved up to New York City. And while I was a student there, I had the opportunity to do a semester with a theater artist from Brazil named Augusto Boal. He had an interesting life. He did political theater in Brazil in the 70s. He was kidnapped off the street, tortured, and then lived in exile for a number of years. And there's a whole genre of theater that he spawned called Theater for the Oppressed. And so I just needed the credits, actually, at the time. And I had an advisor with the foresight to understand that I like to kick hornets' nests. And so she said, you should probably do this semester with this guy. And so out of that, I sort of decided, no, I don't want to be this Broadway actor. I actually want to do art that's around politics. So I lived and worked in New York City for a long time, and I became really interested in theater with young people. When you think about young people, they, especially teenagers, they're not children, they're not adults. They live in this in-between. They oftentimes are expected to make decisions for themselves, and yet that decision making is taken away from them as well. They just live in this in-between world. And so I also had a very sort of tumultuous teenage years, and thought that working with young people at that age group, giving them some sort of direction for all of the angst and the responses they have to the world going around them would be interesting. Lived and worked in New York City for a while, and then the winters in New York were terrible, and I every winter thought I was going to die, and every winter I thought about leaving for somewhere warmer. And then in 2012, in February, Gigi from Big Thought, she used to be at Big Thought, came up for this conference up there, and she did this presentation on Dallas and this arts district and like this amazing thing. And I was like, what is this thing? Like, that's my city. And so then I started reconsidering, okay, well, maybe Dallas might be interesting to go back to. And so I spent the next couple of months sort of researching, leaving the cold and coming back to Dallas and everything that was happening here. And I made the move in May of 2012. And I worked at Dallas Theater Center, managing their education programs for 2 years, and then broke off to found Cry Havoc Theater Company. And I really created that company because while there was a lot of art happening in Dallas and a lot of really interesting things, there weren't really a lot of opportunities for young people. Most of the theater in this city, if you're a teenager and you want to be in a show, it's pay to play. You pay a fee and you get to be on stage. And that wouldn't have been possible for me as a young person, and I wanted to open that up to a broader group in Dallas. And then there wasn't anybody creating new work. There were a lot of versions of Annie. Not that there's anything wrong with Annie. Annie's great, but I wanted to do something a little different.
I think you've got a clip.
I do. Yeah. And so we create original work, and we often deal with issues of social justice. The clip I'm going to show is from Babel, which opened last July at the AT&T Performing Arts Center as part of the Elevator Project. For that, we traveled the country collecting, I took the teenagers, we collected first-person interviews on gun violence, traveled to Sandy Hook and interviewed parents there, went to D.C., interviewed politicians there, and then all became NRA members and went to the NRA convention. So there's a clip of Babel.
So I couldn't remember, like, at first who was absent. I did have 2 kids absent that day, so I had 17 kids, and I was like, look in your clusters, who's here? Terrible. But all my kids survived, and then the parents. And you can only imagine what it looked like when they got their kid. So, you know, we had a piece of paper ripped for the parents to sign their names when they left. And it was, I'll just never forget some of their faces. I remember one dad hugging me, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Do you want me to stay?" And I'm like, "Yes." And then there were the whisperings.
And so then I took Jake off to the front, and I signed him off to a friend, and I think I saw 4, I think at that moment, of Dylan's classmates with an adult I didn't recognize. And so I go over to him, and I'm like, "Where's the rest of the kids?" And he says, "I don't know, I've just been asked to stand here and wait." And I remember I kept seeing one of the girls who was Dylan's reading partner, and she just stared at me with this blank face. And then they basically said, "If you're still here, if you could go to the back rooms."
And then, you know, so there was like this room where the parents were slowly, well, there were parents and no kids.
So that was obviously a scene taken from interviews from the parents at Sandy Hook. The project that we're working on now is a co-production with Kitchen Dog Theater. We just spent spring break down at the border in McAllen and Brownsville. We volunteered at Catholic Charities. We interviewed the public defender in McAllen. We observed both immigration court, where teenagers tried to defend themselves with no lawyer for asylum in a language they don't speak. We observed criminal court. We traveled over the bridge into Mexico and interviewed folks who were waiting to come in, and we also interviewed ICE. So that show from interviews, we're continuing interviews, will go up this summer.
Very contemporary, yeah. Issue. It's breaking as we speak what is happening, and you're going to be doing a show with that. Now, I'm going to push back on you guys here a little bit. You've convinced me that politics has an important role in making art. There's just a kind of a belief, and you kind of talked about it a little earlier, that, you know, it makes it more trivial. It doesn't stand the test of time. It's somehow okay at that moment. I think of Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the second largest selling book after the Bible in the 19th century. Changed the Norse perspective on slavery, but people don't think of it as a great novel now, okay? An important one, maybe. Can this be art that we make and talk about that does stand the test of time? Anybody?
The art historian, want to take it?
Well, I think the main role of the political world is in creating an environment for art to thrive, and especially by funding it. And I think we could do a lot better job of that always. But especially in Dallas, where I think, it's interesting. I think Dallas is a great city to be an artist, but if you talk to most artists, they will tell you no. But I think if you went to any artist in any city in America and said, is this a good place to be an artist? The artist's natural response would be no. But I mean, I think the things that politics can do are helping to fund institutions and community organizations that are working in art.
So
But
you're
also,
taking it in a different direction, that politics are not just subject, but it's the total.
Yeah, and I think I don't think there needs to be some kind of direct, obviously governments will commission arts here as part of 1% programs or what have you. But I think it's really setting the conditions for, and it's also do so indirectly. The things that make a city compatible with arts are housing policy, transportation policy, parks, all the things that make it good for normal people. And I think, that's what we could do a better job on in Dallas.
Okay. You go. I'm going to take that for a second. So, I mean, the concept of art for art's sake is pretty recent, right? It's emerged around the 18th century. And so this idea of what stands the test of time, I think can be questioned, right? I mean, time tends to wash away the politics of art. And so if we think about every sort of radical jump in and I'm thinking of visual art in particular, but I'm sure it can be in music and theater as well. You're talking about avant-garde artists who are pushing against what came before. And so there's radicality in that. And also, if we talk about before this moment of art for art's sake, we're talking about pre-European art, everything else. We're talking about art that functions in its society, which societies and communities involve politics and social relating. So I think that it does, this perpetuation of this idea does all of us a disservice as to what really we could be really embracing about what's powerful about art making and what's powerful to our society in terms of reflecting humanity and also causing us to think about greater things for our humanity.
Yeah. Maura?
Well, I'm going to yes and that. Good art, right? Good, good in the sense of aesthetically pleasing is going to stand the test of time, I think, right? So when the politics has passed, I think that something that's really well made is going to be appreciated as it is, right? She's going to push back.
I was going to jump in.
Go ahead.
I mean, so one of my favorite paintings to deconstruct with first-year students at SMU is Manet's Olympia, which those of you who know it, it's in sort of response to the tradition of the female nude, in response to Titian's Venus, I'm going to not pronounce the name right because I don't speak Italian, Urbino, which it's fighting against, or responding against the female nude as an object to be gazed at. So in this painting, he paints his friends modeled as a prostitute, so a white woman in the nude as a prostitute with a very confronting gaze to the viewer, and then a black woman as her handservant handing her a bouquet of flowers that's very curiously drawn. I won't say what it's drawn like, but you can imagine. So this painting, he was making a direct statement and sort of an affront to the classical tradition. And in general, when I learned about this, sort of the politics were washed away a little bit. And then along comes a woman, she was a Wall Street broker, a black woman, who was sitting in an art history class. Or I should say, they always diminish the role of a black woman when talking about this in the art canon. So she was in an art history appreciation class, and she, like a lot of people of color, like, what about that woman, you know? And there's usually not a response. So she took it upon herself she decided to leave Wall Street, become an art historian, go for a PhD, and she did research in Monet's papers and created this huge splash in the art world because she's finding material that shows that this woman, Laura, was actually more than just a black figure by which to measure whiteness, and possibly more of a muse, not a lover, but he was very affectionate. He wrote very affectionate letters to her. And so in that way, if we start to put that history back into that painting, we realize how radical that painting was, right?
Yeah, Mark? I would actually contest the idea that the more the politics slips away, the easier it is for us to understand it and for it to become power. I think it's the opposite, which is almost what the anecdote you've talked about is true, and it's kind of what my book was about. Rubens is not the world's most favorite painter today. He was the world's most favorite painter when he was alive and for the century after, basically, because the kind of painting he was doing and the politics of it were familiar. Once the politics is drained, then it kind of becomes empty and we forget about it. And especially with Rubens, it's a lot of mythological history and biblical history that most people aren't familiar with. So people will go walk past it in the museum and they go, that's famous, and they move on to the next thing. So, I mean, I think what's powerful about, the Impressionists generally and Manet, Cézanne in particular, is that, yeah, they're beautiful works, but that politics is, I think art historians, that politics that's implicit in them, people are aware of it, and I think it's part of what makes it strong. I think that's true with a lot of, I just think that's true generally with art. The more we know about the politics, the stronger the work is, not the weaker.
Right.
Lauren, you've said that as an artist, you said artist, told me the phrase artist is citizen, meaning you need to get involved in the issues of the day. And Rubens definitely did that. At times, you are a citizen, the artist can be conflicted with other citizens. Okay, in that. I mean, you were definitely, when we took up the issue of the Confederate monument at City Council, your thing was let's do something with a piece of art with that to shock and teach people, not just tear it down. That wasn't politically cool. Okay, a lot of people voted against you. Okay, how does that make you feel when you're trying to do something that's got a vision, but it's not of that moment?
I mean, I'll say my own mother was against me, right? She's,
Yeah.
It's a very emotional issue. So she was for the art, but at the same time, every time she looked at that object, she got very upset, and I understood that, right? I was asking her to trust me. The thing is, for me, again, there's no such thing as failure. Like, those moments are generative and they create opportunity. I realized going in, I had sort of a presentation I was going to make, but then when I spoke with people, I realized that it was not going to get the vote, right? So for me at that point, it was about inserting a certain discourse into the public record, which is why I gave this treatise on the idea of recontextualization, because I wanted that word to be inserted into public discourse, because I do feel like we've had a very reduced level of public discourse around this issue. And it's difficult to have a nuanced discussion. So it was interesting for me. So of course, the ephemera from that becomes part of like what pushes my work further, right? I'm going to respond to what comes out in public. So it was really interesting for me to see how this word recontextualization traveled into the public space. So, for instance, I saw one Fox News like Flashpoint debate, and like the conservative guy was like, recontextualization. And I was like, that's not like how I was using it, you know? Or how like the difference between the choice to use re-envision versus recontextualization and how people sort of responded to that. So for me, that is giving me a lot of my work. I'm looking at language in general, so it gives me sort of inspiration to go forward. I'm still going forward with a proposal, whether it gets realized or not. But the second thing that I took away from that moment, and it was something that Councilman Kingston said, which was, I failed to be able to imagine, so I'm paraphrasing. And to me, that was a very key moment. So when friends that were watching that over the feed, someone texted me and said, so if you were a scientist and you were saying, I'm doing this research on cancer, would the public be like, well, I failed to see it. I failed to imagine it, you know? I mean, no, most likely not, right? If you are in that profession. But what does happen with artists is that the skill set that we've all studied, that we're honing, still isn't completely trusted in the public sphere. And so the idea that I can imagine it, right, and someone who isn't in the arts can't, and then that becomes the final say in things, that was like mind-blowing for me.
Well, it's true. It's you know, we have several levels of this world that we live in, and most of it is very pragmatic, and more you deal with the pragmatic. I mean, people getting killed with gun violence and the issue at the border. These are young men and women. Is there anything too heavy for them? Is there a line that you don't want to cross, or is it difficult as an adult to lead them through that process?
So I also am a certified theater teacher, and I'm certified pre-K through 12, and I've done child development and all ages and student taught all ages. So I'm a firm believer that we can find ways to talk about all of these subjects that are age appropriate for every single age, and that we should be talking about these subjects.
We should talk to them about
this. We should talk with kids in age-appropriate ways for where they're at. We shouldn't wait until they're graduated from high school to engage in conversations like this. So the teenagers that are working with me on these shows, they're aged 15 to 18. I mean, if you know any 15 to 18-year-olds, they deal with a lot of stuff at school, and they have a knowledge and experience of things that we as adults sometimes want to pretend they don't know about, right? So for me, there isn't a topic that, I can't think of a topic in which we wouldn't delve into it. It's just how we would delve into it. For this situation at the border, I took some lessons from doing Babel, which was about the gun violence, and we've met with several therapists along the way. Before we went to the border, we're going to talk with one here again to sort of debrief us, just so that we're not taking on these stories and experiencing secondary trauma. But these are issues, 70% of DISD is Latino, and most of these kids know somebody whose life is in some way impacted by what's happening at the border. So I feel like this is giving them an opportunity to engage in this topic in
a totally different way than what they get.
And they're learning. I mean, like we sat down with ICE too, right? So they're hearing and interviewing all sides of the conversation. So I can't think of a topic off the top of my head we wouldn't tackle.
Well, at times art bumps up against that. I remember the famous immersion, the crucifix in the urine, okay? It was like, oh yeah, that Piss Christ, that is unacceptable, okay? And then the Emmett Till painting by a white woman that blacks got mad. You can't do that because that's a, you know, how do you stay politically correct and let art be free? I mean, do you even worry about that as an art critic?
Well, I mean, Dallas, we've had our moments of Philistinism, right? You know, I work in, we took over at the Dallas Morning News, we took over the old Dallas Public Library building, and, you know, the great story was that when it was built by George Dahl, he commissioned the great Harry Bertoia, the wonderful sculptor, to build this big screen that would welcome you to the building. And when R.L. Thornton walked in to the building for the first time and saw the screen, he said, "What the heck is this hunk of junk?" And he refused to pay for it. And Dahl was, you know, so appalled that he took it home himself. And eventually, it was such an embarrassment to the city that Thornton relented, and the thing went up. And now you can see it if you go to the Dallas Public Library, the new library. It's there. You got to look up when you're walking in, but it's there. So I think it's an issue. But to me, again, the most important, you know, there are moments where the city has arts issues before it. But to me, the issue isn't so much this question of, like, is that art, isn't that art? The real issue is, like, how are we going to fund things? Where's the money going to come from?
Show me the
and
money.
Who gets it?
You keep coming back to that.
Who gets it? Yes, I keep coming back to the money. Who gets it? We're in the arts district. There are a lot of institutions here that are in need of money, but they could easily drain the entire arts budget and leave all of the little smaller community organizations that also need arts funding. We need to figure out. So that's political. Where art gets political is figuring out how we apportion the limited funds that we have, and then finding out, you know, how can we get more funds. And I know there's a question now about this hotel tax and whether it should go to Visit Dallas, which I don't think should get a penny of it based on its record. I mean, it's sort of classic Dallas that we would devote money to a booster organization to get people to come to Dallas instead of the actual arts organizations that would actually make it an attractive place. So, to me, that's how we can, that's where politics, we can talk about
that makes the biggest impact.
That's where what we got to do is figure out how to get our arts budget increased and going, and figure out how to spend it appropriately.
That's great. Let's stay on that subject about Dallas. Okay, that's how we can make Dallas better. What about you? You come back and you're working in this thing. What suggestions, coaching do you have to the next mayor?
I have something for everybody, and things that not everybody wants to hear. You know, I think. So I hear a lot of, I'm a believer as an artist that if you do the work, the money will follow. Like, if you focus on the work and you make good work, you will find an audience that will support you. That may or may not be from the OCA, the city of Dallas, this or that, but if you focus on the work, the money will follow. And one thing I've noticed for Dallas artists, for some artists, there is this pushback, well, I need money in order to make art, instead of focusing on making art and finding their base. And I know. So
it's okay.
There's that piece. I think that we need to talk about space in this city. There is not enough space, especially for performing arts groups, to have access to, that is affordable to rehearse in and to perform in.
That's why the Kalita Humphreys Theater should be freed from the grip of the Dallas. That's why the Kalita Humphreys Theater, the master plan for the Kalita Humphreys Theater restoration needs to be passed. So it could be opened up to all of the theater groups in the city instead of just being...
Well, we also need to talk about fire marshals not shutting down venues when artists are putting works up. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff, right? I don't know what the city can do in terms of...
Okay, so we got money, we got space.
Space.
Okay, what else?
The city can't fund everything, and we have a lot of really generous patrons in the city, and I would love to see them not just fund the big arts institutions, but to really step forward and support small organizations so that we can create and sustain this ecosystem in Dallas that is here.
Lauren, we want you to stay in Dallas. Bright lights might attract you to other places, okay? You know, why would you leave Dallas? Okay, let's take that question. What's not here that couldn't be, say I've got to go elsewhere? Let's be critical about ourselves.
Yes. So, I mean, Dallas, for me, Dallas occupies this interesting space for me. On one end, it has, the sort of culture of the beginning of the Southwest, right, frontier. So, like, for instance, I don't think I could have done a Dallas Drinking Fountain project in other cities with a more sort of larger art commission that was part of the county, right? Like, I was able to do that work because of the loophole, because there was nothing that said I couldn't, And so in that way, I find, like, working in Dallas, that's been very interesting to navigate those things for me. But I will say it has been also very difficult and tiring. And part of that has to do with, I think that, they say that North Texas has a large amount of funders and patrons. It's usually for object-based, market-based work. But I think that sort of really...
Which is, you're more conceptual, so it's more difficult.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
So for instance, I moved back here because I was told I needed to move back here. I'd raised most of the funding I raised half of the funding nationally for a drinking fountain project, and I was basically told in order to raise the rest of the money here, I needed to be here, and people needed to know me, and I knew, like, that's Southern culture, so I understand it. I grew up here. But I moved back here, and it was right at the beginning of the Obama years. So these conversations about race and Black Lives Matter and conceptual art weren't quite a thing yet. And I talked to about 30 different family and private foundations. Not one came back with funding. In fact, I heard some interesting, I had very many interesting conversations. One of them was, this is really an interesting project. I can't figure out if it's art or if it's history, if it's, like, I couldn't figure it out. But, my family foundation is named after my great-grandfather. He was a racist. He was this, he was that. And so we're honoring his legacy. So that still exists, right? Yes, that was a conversation. And it was actually a person who's become my friend now. So that's a conversation. So I will say that it's difficult here to do work that's really pushing an envelope. I'm not saying that can't be done.
Because the money.
Well, because it's easy to get blacklisted.
I gotcha.
It's easy to make a person, the wrong person, upset, and then you sort of, But I will say, on the flip side of that, community-wise, the Dallas arts community, the makers have been so supportive, right? So it has this, for me, it occupies a strange space for me. And so for me, it's productive, but I work alone, and I work in a way that's like, I'm going to get it done however I'm going to get it done. I don't rely, or I don't think about people making or breaking me, right? And so I figure it out. But I'm turning 40 in a month.
No.
And so I'm approaching a place in my life where I, want to be in love, and I want to have a little bit of an easier time and support. So,
Mark, you brought your family down here. You've talked about a couple of things, but somehow when a family's here, you've got hope about what this place can be. What's your hope for Dallas?
Well, it's been really great to be here like the last 6 years. It's been such a tremendous change that I've seen even in the last 6 years. The city making, obviously, so many entrenched, difficult problems that we have to tackle, but we killed the toll road. Yeah, give yourself a hand. It looks like there might be a plan for Fair Park that's coming along. you know, things are happening. And to me, I just think it's a great place to be. There's a possibility here. I mean, it's hard, but there's possibility here. I think it's actually a great place to be interested in the arts because it's a community that's manageable, that's growing, that's interesting. Space is inexpensive, and it's Texas, and Dallas, which is an amazing place to be. It's just, you know, it's like it's epic in every way, and to me that makes it exciting. That there's possibility here. You can actually do things here, and have an impact. And I think that if you're an artist, I think that's great. That doesn't mean it's perfect because it's not. Yeah.
I would add, Cry Havoc, I couldn't have done Cry Havoc in New York City. Like you know, the space here, to your point, that you can do things here that you can't do elsewhere. The press will show up and review something. I started Cry Havoc, I got and I hadn't done anything here, and I got a grant from the city, you know, a special projects grant, and then I did a Kickstarter campaign to match it. Like, it is possible to start something here, and I think that that's one of the good things that Dallas has going for it. There are possibilities. It's just about sustaining it and finding ways to sustain it, and that takes funders, that takes space, that takes, I don't know.
And I will say, in terms of the movement of the OCA in the last few years, I mean, the OCA Public Art Department was at the talk that I gave at Americans for the Art, and I remember like everyone coming up and like, oh my God, amazing, you know, and like wanting to talk more about some of the ideas we were talking about there. And I've seen this now that seed sort of sprout. So, you know, Dallas is on par with having a residency to put artists into the public or the civic sectors in City Hall, right? That's happening in New York. That's happening in all the major sectors. We're not behind that, you know? So I do think that there are things that are happening that's right on par with others, but I just wish it were a little bit easier to get done.
Easier and faster for me. I mean, you know, it's just like I want to get it, you know, going faster. And sometimes these things grow at their own rate. But I think I want these kids that go to your theater, okay, to stay here, to spread their wings, come back. This be a place where they.
I've told them that I'm retiring in 10 years, and one of them has to step in.
Okay, good. Well, guys, this has been a fun time for me just listening to you all. I'm smarter for it, so thank you very much. I just want to say in closing to folks that I have happily and intentionally leaned into the subject of art while I've been mayor. I began doing so as a personal prerogative of the office, whether in taking in invitations to openings or to special shows, productions of local theaters, and raising money for the Arts District. I loved it. I did it because of a deep passion for our artistic product and the community that makes it work. But in doing so, I realized that something was happening of strategic importance of our city. You guys talked a little bit about it. I'm proud. I have no problem being proud of some of the accomplishments we've done in recent years. The fact that Yap went to the New York Philharmonic is an amazing comment on what we've done at the Symphony. The Nasher initiating the Nasher Prize, world's most premier sculptor every year, is something special. We cleaned up the balance sheet at the AT&T Performing Arts Center, and that was important. The Dallas Theater Center winning the Tony, I heard you guys applaud for that. The creation of Aurora, that night of lights that we do every 2 years here in Dallas, can be something special. The renaming of this building for the Moody family and the creation of the Moody Fund for the Arts for those small artists that we have now that's starting to spin out some of that money. We do spend money in the hotel tax, and maybe we should spend more. We're making progress on that. And a unanimous city council vote for our arts and culture plan. I'm proud that we're talking about April as Dallas Arts Month, and we're getting together as an artistic community. And I could bore us all more with self-patting on our back, but I don't think that's what we want to do, because there's so much more to do. We have just started this monumental marathon where the excitement and the challenge are in front of us, not in the rearview mirror. I think that's what's so exciting. It's what we can create on this blank canvas now. And through that sojourn, hopefully art in our city will not only take us to be seen by others in the world as a special place, but more importantly, and I believe much more importantly, art will be a stage where our city grows. Art will help us grow as a city. I hope that art will help us grow intellectually, spiritually, politically, as we've spoken tonight, and by doing that, we become a tighter and more hopeful citizen family, where all of us see a better future for all of us. To do that, I close with just a challenge. I've thought about this. Let us elevate and attract the artist in this next act. Yes, artists need buildings and organizations, funding, environments, and critics, but all those people and things must support the real shamans of our tribe, and that's the painters, the actors, the singers, the drummers, the dancers, the jesters. They choose their calling because of their passions, not because it's easy. It is not, but it is important, and it's premier in our city. Because these are the women and men who will lead us to our future artistic destiny, whether it's good or bad. It is time that we make artists central to our city and our neighborhoods, and by doing so become sculptors ourselves, shaping Dallas' destiny. I close paraphrasing John Adams. I must study politics that my son and daughters have liberty to study commerce and philosophy in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, and music. It's a long journey that we're on, and we have a high calling, but I know we can do it. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Great.